Zerglings are pretty weak against the Planetary Fortress. So number one, the Zergling deals just 5 base damage and the Planetary Fortress has 2 base armor. So the Zergling just doesn't deal a lot of damage. And the Zergling, of course, is a melee unit, so you need to surround the Planetary Fortress to deal enough damage. And that's difficult because the pathing of the Zerglings is going to be obstructed by the repairing SCVs. And again, because the Zergling is a melee unit, you can't really focus fire the SCVs because the Zergling is going to be aggroed to the Planetary Fortress. So I would say the Zergling is really not a strong counter to the Planetary Fortress. I would put it into D tier. The Roach is also not good because the Roach just doesn't have a high DPS amount. So the Roach is a tank, but the DPS of a Roach, I would say, is often not enough to out DPS the healing of the repairing SCVs. And the Roach is also pretty vulnerable to the Planetary Fortress splash damage. So it's not strong. I would put it into C tier. The Baneling is very good, I think, because the Baneling has 2 types of bonus damage. So the Baneling deals bonus damage to buildings and it deals bonus damage to light units and it has splash damage. So if you manage to get a Baneling into proximity of the Planetary Fortress and they detonate, the Baneling will damage the fortress and the SCVs. So the Baneling is very good at attacking simultaneously the building and the repairing SCVs. And I mean, the Baneling is not cheap. It's expensive to blow up a Planetary Fortress like this, but I still think the Baneling deserves the S tier. And then we have the Queen, and the Queen, of course, is terrible. I'll put it into D tier. So the Queen's anti-ground attack is 2 times 4, and the Planetary Fortress has 2 base armor. The 2 armor is subtracted from both of the 2 attacks, so this means that the Queen just deals 4 damage per attack to the fortress. This is never enough to kill a fortress. It's useless, D tier. And then we have the Ravager, and the Ravager is pretty okay, I think. It's not tremendously strong, but it is okay. So the Ravager has a base range of the standard attack of 6, and this is the same range as the Planetary Fortress. So the auto attack of the Ravager does not outrange the Planetary Fortress, and it's also not super high DPS, but the Corrosive Bile has a range of 9, so you can hit the Planetary Fortress with a Bile without being in range of the fortress. Also, the Ravager is pretty big, so it is not vulnerable to the Planetary Fortress splash damage. And of course, if you're good at using the Bile, you can hit the fortress and the SCVs simultaneously if you fire the Bile very close to the fortress. But then again, its DPS is also not super high, even if you include the Bile, so it can be out-repaired by the SCVs. I would say it's something between A tier and D tier, but I would put it into A tier. And then we have the Hydralisk, and the Hydralisk is okay, but not super strong. So the Hydralisk is good because it has a very high DPS. So if you take a group of Hydralisks and you just focus down the Planetary Fortress, the damage will often be enough to out DPS the repairing of the SCVs. And because the Hydralisk attacks pretty quickly, you can also micro them pretty good to attack the repairing SCVs. So I would say it's a B tier, but the Hydra still has a range that is, it doesn't outrange the Planetary Fortress. It's also vulnerable to splash damage, but it is okay, I would say, B tier. And then we have the Mutalisk. So the Mutalisk is an air unit, of course, and the PF doesn't have anti-air, which is good for the Muta. But then again, the DPS of the Muta is extremely low. I think it's almost impossible to out DPS the repairing of the repairing SCVs, and in a real game scenario a Planetary Fortress will almost always be surrounded by missile turrets. So I think because the Muta has super low DPS, it's really not strong. I would put it into C tier. And the Corruptor, that's an interesting one, because it doesn't have an anti-ground attack, of course, but it has the caustic spray ability. And this ability is pretty good because it starts with dealing 4 deep, or I think 7 DPS for a couple of 7s, and then the DPS goes up to 35 versus buildings, and that's very good. So a couple of corruptors deal 35 DPS per corruptor to a building. That's good, but the corruptor, of course, has the downside of not being able to attack the repairing SCVs. So, I mean, if you have like a lot of corruptors, let's say 20, I think it is very strong against the planetary, but in a real game scenario, you're not going to have that many. And their damage is good, but can be out-healed by the SCVs, and you can never actually attack the repairing SCVs. So it is good, but it is not super strong. And then we have the Infestor. And the Infestor, if we look at the spells, Neural Parasite, useless. Fungal Growth, useless. And the Shroud has maybe some value because the Shroud can protect your other units from the Planetary Fortress fire. So let's assume you have a bunch of Hydras, you want to kill the Planetary Fortress, and then you just put a Microbial Shroud on the Hydras. Yes, it is going to protect the Hydras, but other than that, the Infestor has no real use, I think. It's not completely useless, but I would put it into C tier. The Lurker is good, but also not super strong. I mean, the Lurker has a long range. It has a range of 7, upgradable to 9. So this is slightly higher than the Planetary Fortress range of 6. So you can get free hits with the Lurker on the Planetary Fortress. And the Lurker deals bonus damage to armored units and also to buildings like the Planetary Fortress. And the Lurker has splash damage. So when you borrow a couple of Lurkers in proximity to the Planetary Fortress, you will simultaneously deal damage to the fortress and to the SCVs, which is strong. So overall, I think I would put the Lurker into A tier because it is actually very easy to get rid of the SCVs around the Planetary Fortress, but the single target DPS of the Lurker is pretty low. So you will kill the surrounding SCVs, but it is actually not easy to kill the planetary because the DPS is not super high, but it is solid. I would say it's an A tier. Next we have the Swarm Host, and the Swarm Host is an interesting one. I would say it's a strong unit because number one, the Planetary Fortress is immobile. Okay, and that's important because the Locust have a short time to live. So the counter to Locust is often just lifting your buildings or running away. But the Planetary Fortress can't do that. So that's already good for the Swarm Host. And the Locusts have a very high DPS. So if you focus fire down the Planetary Fortress with the Locusts, it's hard to out-repair the DPS. I think it is okay, but also not perfect because, I mean, the ability Spawn Locust has a very long cooldown, and the Locusts are also very vulnerable to the Planetary Fortress splash damage. So it's not perfect, but it is good. And next we have the Broodlord. Yeah, this is also a good one because, of course, it is a flying unit with an anti-ground attack. It can never be hit by the Planetary Fortress, but on the other hand, the Broodlord DPS is also not high. So the Broodlord just deals 20 damage per shot. And for how much the Broodlord costs, this is very, very bad. And the Broodlings are also not super useful because the Broodlings deal 4 base damage, but the Planetary Fortress has 2 base armor. So a lot of the damage is going to be cancelled out. And again, the broodlings are going to derp around because of the repairing SCVs. Okay, so when the Terran makes like the ring of repairing SCVs, the broodlings are going to spawn outside the ring, and they are still going to be aggroed to the Planetary Fortress. They are going to derp around. So I would say B. Yeah, it's good, but it's not tremendously strong. I think B or A. I would put it into B tier. And then we have the Viper. That's also an interesting one. If we look at the spells from the Viper, Abduct, useless, doesn't work against buildings. Parasitic Bomb, useless, also doesn't work against buildings. But the Blinding Cloud is good. I mean, It doesn't deal damage to the fortress, but it reduces the range of the Planetary Fortress to 1. So if you throw Blinding Cloud on a Planetary Fortress and then attack the fortress with whatever unit, let's say Hydras or so, the Planetary Fortress will not be able to strike back. So the unit itself doesn't do anything to damage the fortress, but it is a solid support unit because of the Blinding Cloud. I would put it into B tier. And next we have the Ultralisk, and I think the Ultra is really strong because the Ultra, number one, it is not vulnerable to the splash damage of the Planetary Fortress because it is so big. And another thing is the Ultra has a very high amount of HP, so it doesn't just die when it's in range of the Planetary Fortress. It's hard to kill, and it has splash damage, and it has a range of 1. So this means even when the Terran makes a ring of SCVs around the fortress, when you use the Ultra to attack the fortress will still receive damage, and simultaneously the repairing SCVs will also be damaged because of the splash damage. So the Ultra is really good. I would put it into S tier. And then we have these guys here, the Overseer and the Spine and the Spore. They are of course D tier. They don't do nothing against the Planetary Fortress. Alright dudes, thanks for watching.